so far has been an extraordinary one on the international stage with Venezuela, and now, of course, what Donald Trump's been saying about other nations, including Colombia and, of course, Greenland. To get more on the story, we're joined by the Shadow Defence Secretary, James Cartlidge. Good to have you with us. So overnight, Donald Trump has doubled down on his threat to take over Greenland. He said, we need Greenland for national security. We need it for national security right now. What's your response?
Well, I mean, we take actually a pretty similar view to the government on this, which is it's very clear Greenland is part of Denmark. Denmark is a sovereign country. It is a close ally of the United Kingdom and, of course, a NATO member. And so, you know, we would, as to echo, dare I say, what the Prime Minister said, we'd stand by them. And what I would say is, you know, whatever talk there's been on Greenland, the US actually has always been very strong in supporting NATO. If you look at what Rubio said last April at the NATO conference...
So Donald Trump's always been strong on supporting NATO?
I'm talking about...
America.
About the Secretary of State. And at that meeting, he expressed the strong support of President Trump. Now, you know, obviously we want to see the strongest possible NATO. What I think, and I've said this on your programme before, what we do really need to focus on is the countries in NATO need to do more for their own defence, and I think that will strengthen our position.
You said that the US has always been strong in supporting NATO, and you quote Marco Rubio, which I accept, but Donald Trump, the guy leading the United States, has not always been strong on NATO, has he? You accept that? There's been a lot of concern over what his attitude to NATO actually is.
But well, what I was quoting was what their Secretary of State said at a NATO meeting, and he said that President Trump, who was speaking on his behalf, strongly backs NATO. I've not seen or heard President Trump saying, he's against NATO. The US is a key part of it; it's integral. But of course, what President Trump has said very clearly, and where I actually agree with him strongly, is that NATO members need to do more, need to spend more. And I think that the lesson from all of this, I'm bound to say, and not just because I'm Shadow Defence Secretary, but the lesson is we do need to spend more on defence, not just the UK, but other countries in NATO, and do it in a way that shows seriousness. So about pace of rearmament as well, because the world is getting, unfortunately, less stable.
Can I be honest with you? Because over the last kind of 24 hours or so, I have been, quite taken aback, I'll be honest, by politicians from both Labour and the Conservatives being very reluctant to criticise Donald Trump, who has said he wants to take over Greenland. And the Danish Prime Minister has come forward...
Did he use the phrase take over?
We need Greenland for national security. We need it right now. He says, he's gone on to say, I think Greenland's very important for the national security of the United States. I mean, he's been saying this for a long time as well. This is not just comments. He's been making these comments.
I get that, but he's not said we're going to take over Greenland, which is slightly different wording. But look, I totally understand why you're saying that. But equally...
Should he be making these threats?
Your point was, about reluctance to criticise. First of all, the United States is our closest ally, very important ally of the United Kingdom. Secondly, actually, if you take the Venezuela situation, whatever one thinks of the method, and I have to say militarily it was a spectacular operation, it would appear, there are benefits from that in terms of, Maduro's now gone. He was a terrible leader for Venezuela. What I think is most important from all of this is that Venezuela now has a chance to transition to a stable democracy. Now, that is not straightforward, but I think that should be the top priority. And what I would want to see from the Prime Minister and the Labour government is using all diplomatic means to ensure that that can happen. And I think there's a consensus on that point.
Is it important for us not to criticise Donald Trump too much? Because, frankly, we need him when it comes to Ukraine.
No, I mean, we shouldn't be gratuitously criticising for the sake of it. Obviously, if there are aspects of American policy we disagree with, we should be free to say that.
What about saying they need Greenland? I mean, that's the...
Well, I just, look...
You don't take him seriously, is that what you're saying?
I think that, he may have his own way of saying things, let's be honest, right, as a president. I judge them by the substantive action. US remains as a committed member of NATO. When I go back to what Rubio was saying and what the actual actions of the US are, they take part in NATO exercises. Rubio said in that speech, they're going to be doing more than ever. To be fair, and this is what I was saying, his caveat was, as long as NATO countries do their bit. And I think that is totally fair. And I think the tension here will reduce if NATO members, including those countries that are not spending anything like enough, all do their bit as well.
We've, of course, got this Ukraine meeting going on today, the coalition of the willing in Paris. President Zelensky is saying that they are 90% there on a peace deal for Ukraine. How optimistic or not are you at this stage?
Well, look, I mean, I've worn my Ukraine badge every day since the all-out invasion, and I desperately want to see peace. It's been a terrible war, terrible casualties, kidnapping of children, etc. We all want it to end, but it has to end on a sustainable basis, a lasting peace. So the critical thing from today is security guarantees. I'm not going to prejudge what is discussed. We need to see what countries are going to do for that. But my biggest concern is my worry is that the guy in the Kremlin doesn't want peace, not seriously. I have not seen anything that suggests that. I think my fear is it suits Putin to have a war economy. It suits him to be at war in this way. And I think in whatever we do today, and I welcome what's happening, it's very important. Nevertheless, in parallel, we must be clear-eyed to the Russian threat and exert all possible economic pressure, sanctions, etc., on Putin so that he realises he has no choice but to end this war.
One of the sticking points, of course, over territory. Any deal
Right.
where Ukraine has to give up territory that it currently holds, would that be unacceptable to you?
Well, look, obviously no one wants to see that. But I think it's, to try and sort of prejudge the detail of any negotiation is difficult. I've been clear from the beginning, we're going to stand by Ukraine, and that any deal must be acceptable to them. It mustn't have one foisted on it. And in particular, I've said this every time I've appeared on your programme, on every other on Ukraine, the thing from our point of view and for our allies, if Russia is in some way seen to win from the settlement, that would be terrible for the peace of the world because of the message it would send to our adversaries. So we must be clear-eyed about all this, but I hope we see progress today. I think the Ukrainians certainly deserve it.
OK, thank you very much indeed. James Cartlidge speaking to us there.